Good evening, everybody here in the room. It's great to see so many smiling faces in front of me. And I'm sorry not to be able to see everybody online, but I hope you can hear me clearly. So I'm here to talk a little bit about my journey. And it is a bit of a horror when I see 40 years there. But I thought I would just own up to this and speak about my career over those 40 years. And those of you from Ireland will know Maurice O'Sullivan's 20 years agoing. So that is my reference here. The thing is, the only parallels are his was recollections, mine is recollections. His was about the Blasket Islands, so a little island off the west of Ireland. And I started in Ireland, a little island off the west of Europe. After that, there are no parallels. So let's go back to the beginning. When I was thinking about doing engineering, I really, could not have foreseen what would happen. I looked out and thought, what will I be? And my father, who was an architect, introduced me to a structural engineer so I would understand what my career might be like. And that man told me I would be sitting at a drawing board, doing calculations, doing reinforcement bars, and if I was extremely lucky, I might do a bridge. So this is not my bridge, this is Sir Ove's bridge in Durham. So I never got to do a bridge, but I did get to do a long span structure, so over to Terminal 5 on the right-hand side there. And that was, and still is, my big project, my favorite project. So all in all, not looking at, not knowing what was going to happen, my career has absolutely exceeded my expectations. Now, the older among you in this room will go, I recognize this. There's some nodding. The younger of you will go, what the hell is this? These were the tools of our trade. We sat at a wooden drawing board, we'd set squares, T-squares. And the thing I sort of laughed to myself about was that if we made a mistake drawing something with our ink pens, we had to scratch it out with a razor blade. And if you made a lot of mistakes, there were holes in your drawings and you had to start again. So that was the tools of our trade. So actually, one of the things is we learned to plan ahead a lot more carefully, the minimum number of drawings. We learned to do our calculations once and not like the ones on the right, which are actually from the Sydney Opera House. I copied them, where if you made a mistake or a change, you had to mark it out in red and carry on. So I think actually from those days to the tools we have today has been an amazing change. And I think it is enabling us to do more and more. So great tools. So I started out in Arup and Partners in Dublin, as was said in the introduction, but also early in my career, I was introduced to Engineers Ireland, 22 Cloud Road. It had a lovely bar downstairs, and that meant it was quite an attractive place to go. But I think the thing about those, I think I say in this slide, it was good fortune. In both Arup Ireland and in IEI, as it was then, I found a very nurturing environment. There were always senior industry figures available who wanted to chat to the young people, and us as young people really took advantage of those opportunities to speak to them and to learn from them in our evenings on committees or coming in at the weekend to do a bit of a course. So it was a great environment to start. But my first work with Arup was in 1979 when I was a student. And it was before the Pope visited Ireland, and it was a huge secret. And so they had to decide on a site for the papal mass. And myself and a gentleman called Peter Craven headed up to the Phoenix Park, and the chosen site was the only unsurveyed bit of the park. And we had to do it in secret in daylight. So I learned 3 things. I learned that, we were being chased around the park by the inspectors and having to dash back the car and hide. And that never take a theodolite out of its box unless you can put it back in. That was lesson number 1. But then in the office, they were talking about designing this slender cross. And I was just listening to a man called John Gone talk about wind loads on slender structures. How do you assess the wind load on slender structures? How do you assess it? Vortex shedding. And he was such a generous man. I'd ask him these questions and he would tell me things. He's an aeronautical engineer. And I didn't have any use for these things at the time. I just kept them here. And the other thing I learned was to think about the steelwork that's available, because they designed very carefully the cross and then discovered the steel could not be procured on time. And they had to redesign the cross to work with the steel that would be available on time. So think about your supply chain and what might work out in the longer term. So all those early lessons came in useful. So a couple of years later, I've joined the office and we've moved away from drawing boards and we now have parallel motion. And this isn't a picture from Arup, but this is pretty much what the office looked like. It was all men, bar me, and a couple of other ladies, who were in different floors generally. But the thing that I look back with somewhat horror on was everybody smoked in the office. Mm-hmm. And so the man behind me had his pipe, and the person over here had their cigarette. So you were in this smoke-filled environment all day. I just can't imagine it today. So I got through that, and I was working away on what were very little projects. So this is Trinity College in Dublin, and any Trinity graduates in here today? No, well, you don't know. Oh, yes, well, you'll know this is the pavilion where they went drinking, and that's the club. So anyway, my first job was an extension to the back of the pavilion, but I worked in many other historic parts of the university. And that was really amazing because you got to pull out really old drawings from 18 something and something. You got to have to look up old codes of practice. And working within the constraints of existing buildings was really, really interesting. And I'm sure will become very relevant today if I carry on my working life with existing buildings. But the first time I really got ownership of a package was for the East Stand Lansdowne Road, which is now gone, and the Aviva's there. And my package was the crush barriers and handrails for the new stadium. And I was bloody thrilled to bits about that. But we were designing without real codes and definition of loads. And this was not many years after the Ibrox disaster, and where 66 people had lost their lives and 200 people were injured. So here was I with a small package of work, ensuring the safety of every person who future would come and use that stadium. So I felt like it was a heavy weight. But I thought to myself, doctors look after individuals and think about their lives. Here I have to think about the health and safety of everyone who will use this facility. So early learnings on health and safety. And not so long after that, everyone had to spend a year on site in my time, a whole year. So here's me out at UCD library site, so back in my university. And I hope that most of you will note, no high vis, no hard hats, no boots for women size 5, no ear defenders. And I was supervising the installation of precast driven piles. And the lesson I took from this was protect your ears and that sort of thing. But the piles never reached the strata they were supposed to be. They weren't driving to the right depth. They were rebounding at night. And so call to London, get a geotechnical expert to come over. Somebody flew over and started to understand what was actually happening. And we eventually drove the piles to length, not to set. But it was my first lesson in things don't always go right on site. Your designs don't work out, and you've got to get quick advice and you've got to work around those problems. I'm getting married now at this stage in my life. And my husband had the opportunity to head to Boston. And so off I went with him. He was studying, and I was very lucky to get a job and get paid after a little bit. But boy, was this a culture shock. So here am I moving from a very culturing, nurturing Arup to a sharp commercial where you just have to get on with things yourself. Wonderful people, absolutely wonderful. But I think we went bravely in underestimating the challenges. So I had to move from metric back to feet and inches. I had to moved from most of my buildings having been in concrete. I had to move to steel. I had to learn, American codes. And I had to learn that English was not the same as American in terms of language in the office. So I got caught out a few times there. But actually, I'll tell you the most important thing I learned in America, besides being brave, was diversity and inclusion and the importance of that in the office environment. So the boss there was a guy called Steve Varga, and he had been a Hungarian refugee. So he welcomed into the office Iranians, people from Jamaica, Caribbean, French, Germans, Russians, Irish, and he loved having this mixed office. And over lunches once a month, we'd all bring in our own food. I brought in soda bread generally, baked at home. You bring in and you talk about your culture and you'd share. And it was amazing how you got to know people at a different level by being in that sort of environment. So that was a fantastic couple of years. My husband then got a job in London, so I came to London. And this is where I landed. And this is Arup in London at that time. And so I go from the crazy, busy, fast-paced construction of Boston to the calm of London. And I went from being the only structural engineer on a $35 million shopping centre in Boston to being one of a team of about 35 working on the structure of John Lewis Kingston. And so it was the shopping age era, where there were lots of shopping centres. And so I had to adapt to this different environment and different team size and things like that. And found myself working for 6 years on the corn mill in Darlington. And I saw that through 3 clients, lots of different contractors. But you can see still it's a very busy site. And I think I learned their leadership of a team and how to get stuff out in time to meet the contractor. And so actually it was a hugely valuable experience. I'm going to digress for a minute. Went to the Christmas dinner on the site, off the site, but in the local hotel. And I was put beside the foreman of the site, beside him at the table. I didn't think anything. He said, "How does it feel to be the only woman here today?" And it hadn't even occurred to me, because I was amongst my site team, with my colleagues, with people I worked with. It was part of the team. But I was the only woman there. Anyway, Arup took kindly to my work and made me an associate at this stage. And I took 5 months off with my first child. And you can see I moved from black and white to colour at this stage. I don't know if it means things are brightening up. It means I'm starting to work with Michael Hopkins and Partners. Loved working with them. But I'm also working with East Sussex County Council, the 2 on the right. So Saga headquarters focused in Goodwood Racecourse, school in Hastings, and a police station in Hayward Heath. South Coast years, I call them. So I now am moving into being a multidiscipline engineer, leading, managing a wider team. But I think the importance of this stage in one's career is building relationships and helping those relationships last, so that you keep on doing the repeat work with these organizations. And I also, at this stage, I worked with a guy called John Thornton in a group run by John Thornton and John Berry. Graham is nodding there, he was there. And John said to us, always write up your work. Try and find opportunities to write in journals, to speak about your work. So he made us do a paper on concrete and steel hybrid construction for some magazine. And I thought, this is going to be my ongoing career. I'm going to be doing buildings projects with architects over all this time. But no, along came Portcullis House in Westminster, and I joined the team quite late. And I would still say today, this is the most challenging project I have ever worked on. And it was challenging because all the elements of the design were prefabricated. They were very refined in their sizing, and they were highly integrated as well. And then it all had to be delivered on a constrained site in the public eye. And not everything went well. But I think the thing that was interesting in the context of this was I learned how to deal with a big project in public eye. And it was basically keep your head down and keep working. But at the same time, we were being introduced to email. There was one computer put down among six of us, and we were told, if you'd like to use email, you can agree with your teammate who uses the email when. And we also shared the computer to do all our work. So there was no need to have a computer at each desk. It was also the same time when people started using electronic systems for transferring information. So instead of there being a letter and rolls of drawings and packages of drawings, it was sent electronically. So the pace at which we worked, I think, suddenly had to increase. So I would say this is, I'm guessing, sort of 15 years in, but nothing much had changed in my career and the way I worked between the drawing board and this stage. It was all still quite the same. And it's only from here on in that I think the pace of change has increased a lot. So these are the prefabricated asymmetrical arches from the atrium of Portcullis House, because there's only 6 columns go down through the stations below. And John Thornton, who I mentioned a minute ago, said to me, Dervilla, I want you to design this connection. The things were probably already precast at that stage or about to be. I need you to design the connection inside here. So lots of couplers, lots of reinforcing bars. It hardly all worked. And for me, that was a going backwards into some very detailed design. And it was hard. It was really hard. But I would reflect on that now and say it's really important to go back and to really strengthen your technical skills even as you go forward in your career. So I benefited from that, even though I rebelled for a while. And after a few years, John said to me one day, how about you go to Heathrow to do Terminal 5 project? And I said, no. And he asked again, and I said, no. I was not far-sighted enough to see how wonderful that project would be for me, for my development, and how much I would look back upon it now as my favorite project. And why do I think it was great? It was because we worked in a collaborative way with other people under a collaborative contract. And when there was a problem, we had a far-sighted client who enabled us to solve those problems. He didn't beat us up. He said, go in the room and solve those problems. But it wasn't only the behavioral contract. There's a little image there from the 3D model. We called it the SME, the single model environment. This was the first time we'd really worked digitally. I ask us tonight, why has it taken us so long? This is 2000. Why has it taken us so long to adopt digital methods and to work in single models? But it did. So here was a far-sighted client. They insisted we work like this, and we worked like that. And then they were a brave client. The image on the right is what they call the first run study. So we recognized that the most complex part of this 200-meter wide roof was going to be the supports, the abutments. And so Norman Hayes, who was the project director, agreed. We would, up in North Yorkshire, we would build this, we'd spend £4 million building this first run study. Everything was going to be reused from it, so it wasn't a waste of money, but we were going to build it 9 months ahead of getting on site. So I think that's a big, brave decision. It tested out that the design was ready early enough. It tested out all the methodology of the jacking and putting everything in place. And the client essentially de-risked a risky part of the project by doing this. And when we got to site, it just ran so smoothly because of that work ahead in Yorkshire. And not only was it used for the structure, then they used it to test the facade and the facade erection. And because it is good and dark in this part of North Yorkshire, they also used it to test all the lighting before it was installed in site. So it became a very beneficial thing for the client. And I got a huge amount of joy of, I again spent 6 years on this project. So 6 years is a common thing I spent, but I was able to be involved with this project from the inception and understanding on the top left of how the roof behaved. Thank you, Steve McKechnie, to going to Finland to see them assemble all the elements of the roof. There were 6 or 9 meter sections. The Finns, thank you, the Finns, That roof, that section of the roof is about 100 metre span. And when they checked them in Finland, they were plus or minus 3 millimetres. Pride in their work. Anyway, it then came to site. We had the erection, learned a lot about temporary works and jacking. And here, one of the biggest connections, which you can see visibly when you're out at T5, is the man just easing that connection in. I think is just fabulous because it was so thought about and everything was worked out in advance that it was easy to, everything went together well. And you get these wonderful, wonderful, proud moments in your career. And this was a summer evening when the first lift of the roof was up. It was in 18 meter 54 meter sections. But the first lift was up, 2,100 tons. I remember that number was being lifted at a time. Second was on its way up. You see that's the second lift. And the third section of the roof is on the ground, ready to lift. And we knew at that stage, 1, 2, 3, the whole west of the roof was going to go up easily and smoothly. So proud moment for, me and the whole team. But then T5 was coming to an end, and what does one do? One had delivered a project, and the challenge set ahead of me was, you've got to bid and win work. So I was involved in the team that bid the infrastructure for London 2012, in the team that bid T2 at Heathrow, and in the team that bid T2 in Dublin. And we won all three. This doesn't happen often. And then you have to decide about what are you going to do? And you have decisions of the heart and decisions of the head. And mine was a decision of the heart to go to Dublin and work on a project in my hometown. And here I thought, I'm coming to do something similar again. It's another 10 million passenger per annum terminal. I've done this before, but what I learned was that every project is different, even if it looks a bit the same. And this one, the whole design was driven by the constraints of the site and access to Terminal 1 whilst Terminal 2 was being built. But a fun part of this project was I got to do stakeholder management, and I'd never done that before. And so I got to deal with the angry airlines, the angry residents, and but there was lots of lovely people. And you learn, how do you communicate engineering? How do you talk about your design in a way that a range of people can understand? So that was an interesting challenge. And tips for the family. I had to spend at least one night, maybe 2 nights a week in Dublin every week during the design period. Leave your family, 3 kids at this stage, leave your husband and family on the same night every week, because then the kids knew Mum is not home on Wednesday night. Thursday morning, I've got to be up and get myself out. Mum's not going to be here to help. And that routine really helped the family deal with me being away. Back in London, I got onto the Athletes Village 2012. But at this stage, not the infrastructure. I was helping on developing the concept for all the housing. And we called it the Athletes Village, but actually this is creating legacy. This is creating Stratford City. We designed for the in-use, final in-use. It was converted back for the games, converted again for the Paralympics, and then converted back again to housing. So that was an interesting stage, but I did not find that anything as rewarding as the airports, because I was never going to see the buildings in use, and it was so commercially driven. So I like things that have people at the heart of it. Now, another change in the industry, Arup's main board had been all male till 2009, when the wonderful Jenny Baster, who was our legal counsel, joined the main board. And so we're seeing a change. So I think that was an important time. Us ladies all looked up and said, oh, that's interesting, women can do that. Anyway, a number of years passed, and I was asked by another colleague, would I spend time on Abu Dhabi Midfield Terminal? Now, this terminal, we call it a squashed frog from its configuration. And it was designed, conceived in 2006, 2007, before the global financial crisis. Then it was delayed. Then it was procured on price. And there's not a single connection in this building that is the same as any other connection, because the four arms of the squashed frog reach out, one to El Alamein, one to the city centre, one to the sea, one to the desert, and everything is at skew angles. And the whole shape of the thing is, there's nothing symmetrical anywhere in this building. So highly complex, perhaps more complex than it needed to be. And that coupled with a highly traditional commercial approach, everything being bought on lump sums, and the stop-start nature made this an extremely challenging project. But all those ups and downs, I really enjoyed being in a different culture. I loved the sound of call to prayer, and it was just something completely different. And, you know, even though it only opened last year, it's getting great press. So maybe all things come right in the end. And I couldn't kind of escape aviation, so I was back in London again. Oh, by the way, the routine in Abu Dhabi was go out on Thursday, go out on Saturday afternoon. So you're there for Sunday for starter, and spend the whole week there. Leave on Thursday night and get home to the family on Friday. And I did 1 week in Abu Dhabi, 1 week in London, 1 week in Abu Dhabi, 1 week in London for quite a long period. I wanted to reflect just on the sort of changes that, will have happened over, my career. What's the evolution that I have seen during that time? And so I've seen, and you've seen, manual to machine. I think we can solve much more difficult problems today because of that change. We've seen pen and paper to model. We have a much deeper appreciation of the work we're doing and an ability to coordinate it because we use models today. And we can solve much more complex problems. This is Tottenham Court Road, services in the road and new services coming in. We've moved from union discipline to multidiscipline. So the younger people in the audience, this makes your career much more interesting and much more exciting. And you can get to learn beyond your original discipline. And one that appeals a lot to me is we've moved from outputs to outcomes. So when I was designing the first of these hotels, Embassy Suites in Boston, no, the first one's in Baltimore, and then I decided to do the second one in Michigan, nobody ever mentioned how was the kitchen going to work, how were the staff going to use it, what was access like. It was just, this is design, get it up quickly and cheaply. More recently, I've worked on advising a school in West London on their £20 million development, and this is their sixth one they produced. And every decision we made from the outset of the design right through to completion was about what is needed for the students' education. They're all girls, by the way. What was needed for the education? What do the facilities have to be for the teachers? And how would we enable that through the delivery of the design? And we had an amazing architect who worked that all through, and a fabulous scheme. So that's all delivered now. So I think they're the sort of four key things that I've seen as change. But also, one has a lot of personal transitions. And transitions are hard. Change is hard to deal with. And so I've made, from structural engineer to multidiscipline, design to management and leadership, different roles which Con introduced to the beginning, different locations. And what I would say is really think about these not as hard transitions and difficulties. Think about them as the opportunity that you have to grow and learn and advance your career. And then somehow it seems easier to manage those sort of changes. And the final thing that I have seen in the industry is, it was all about the art of men directing the great sources of power in nature for the use and convenience of man. And everybody who was put in front of me as a role model was a man. Nobody told me about this lovely lady, Emily Roebling. She is the one who oversaw the delivery of the Brooklyn Bridge in New York after her husband got the Benz. Now, wouldn't you want to be an engineer like her? Well, she was probably a project manager, but, nobody told us about these things. And today, I'm proud to say in Arup that, I've had a role in helping with diversity there. And we today are a 60-40 organization. And that sometimes means in some teams 60% women and 40% men. But the 60-40 is what our ambition is, and we've almost 30% of our leadership is women. So I put up the picture of the three gents there, the middle one, Sir Ove, Sir Jack is on the right, Sir Jack's sons. It was a very male environment, but every one of these men, and I knew Sir Jack quite well, were huge allies and advocates for women in the business. They really wanted to see change because they wanted change within their business, but they also wanted changes for their daughters and their granddaughters, and they thought it would be good for us. So I've had a very lucky time there. And I was saying to Con earlier that the pace of change is glacial. 1% per year is good. Mm-hmm. So aim for that in your businesses. Quite often I'm asked questions about how did I manage to have the career I've had and raise the three children I've had. And I drew this little diagram actually a few years ago to say, at the beginning of your career on the left, you have a lot of time to give to your work and to give to your industry. So I was down in Engineers Ireland, as I said. When I came to London, I learned a lot about how to manage things by being on the board of my local house, with a street of mansion block. I did a lot at the local almshouses in my area. And then as the children got older, I had to devote more time to them, and I couldn't give as much time outside of work. But now, as they've all grown up, I find I have a lot of time to give. And I do that through universities, through institutions, but particularly through the Royal Academy of Engineering. And that's probably what's giving me this stage of my life, because what am I doing today? Well, beyond projects, this is a report on computational modelling when I was a member of the Council of Science and Technology, which I nearly said no to, but Sir Mark Walport insisted that I must have time to join this committee, and I did. So thank you, Sir Mark. Please pass that home tonight. His daughters are here. But then the Royal Academy of Engineering, I learned an awful lot under the guidance of senior figures like Sir John Parker, John Brown, and those who again gave me time and got me involved in committees. So we've done this low regrets to get to net zero paper. That was done with Mott MacDonald, Simon Harrison. It's great. And then I've recently been involved in the rapid decarbonisation of the electric grid. And the most recent thing I've done is with the Energy Transition Commission, achieving net zero in buildings. So you can get drawn away from your deep core expertise into advising on other things. And the reason I can advise on these things is because it's how do you deliver major projects is the same way you're going to deliver major infrastructure, is the same way you're going to decarbonize the grid. So there's lots of things that you can bring to bear. And just coming back, I've talked about the changes, but I want to say something about what I think are key enablers of change, things to sort of look out for and hope for. And one of them is forward-looking clients. So this is One Triton Square in London, and it was originally designed for British Land in the 90s. And there was a client who did not decide to demolish this building and rebuild. They decided they were going to retrofit this building. And if I look at my notes here, I will remember some of the numbers. But I could go into all the components, but I don't have time. But particularly the replacement of 3,000 meters of facade involving 25,000 parts. So refurbing those with a temporary factory here in London enabled saving 2,400 tons of carbon and gave a cost saving on a new facade. So we all now need to think more innovatively about how we will reuse, repair, reinstate elements of the building. So this is a forward-looking client. Having creative ideas is the middle one. This bridge is now gone. This was a temporary bridge in the red light district in Amsterdam. But somebody had a crazy idea to print a bridge. And that led to them being able to use sophisticated computational design. And then they 3D printed this bridge. And they had to do lots of testing here in London at Imperial College. But I think it allowed people to think differently and that the properties of that steel would be different and how to make it work. So I'm hoping that bright ideas and creative ideas like that will ultimately take the mainstream part of the business forward. And then absolutely major infrastructure projects enable innovation and change. And I've talked a little bit about T5 before, but this is High Speed 2, visualization of the route from London to Birmingham. You can put on those goggles and you can experience what it's like looking out of the train for that whole journey. And if you sit on the seat, one of the seats there has movement in it, and you can feel what it's like to go on that journey. So I think that's amazing, because the client can use it, the public can use it, and people can engage in and comment on and contribute to a design really before anything's built. And that helps you get public buy-in. So I think those three things might be quite useful. And I just wanted to finish with, and this is focused on the younger people, because the other, is, you've seen in my career starts from little things to bigger projects. Expect change, be really curious, prepare to be adaptable, learn different things from different people. You often get stuck in a particular place. You need to move around a bit. Seek out your development opportunities, build relationships, because the construction industry is absolutely a team game. It's not an I game, it's a we game. And even the biggest problems can be solved by breaking them down into parts and asking for help. So I would say we are faced often as engineers with, difficult and complex problems. And we should not think of them as mission impossible. We should think of them as mission possible. And this is my terminal in Abu Dhabi. And you too can have one of your projects featured with Tom Cruise walking through it, should you choose to. So this was a hugely difficult project, I cannot tell you. But today, I can see it in a movie, and I can take some joy from this. I know he isn't drilling the right way. When I see it, the next clip, he's not done that way. They are the gutters, by the way, because it does rain in Abu Dhabi, and the gutters are absolutely humongous. So thank you. But I asked some questions at the beginning. My questions were, can we evolve fast enough as a profession? Yes, we can. We've shown ourselves we can do it. What enables change? I've talked about 3 enablers for change. But can we be at the forefront and recognized by society? I think, yes, we can. But we do need to step up and be seen to be solving those problems in consultation with the public. So thank you for listening.